Good afternoon. Pleasure to be here. Thank you, Congressman Scott, once again, for your steadfast and continual leadership on these issues. And of course, the long run tomorrow. You guys hear me on this?
Try this now. Hey, all right. So, all right. My name is Matt Cregor. I'm with the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund. My organization works to promote a more inclusive and racially just democracy by focusing our advocacy on economic justice, criminal justice, voting rights, and education. And I'm here speaking not only for my organization, but on behalf of our many allies, be they civil rights groups like the ACLU and Bazelon, who are here in the room with us today, educators, parent groups, student groups, and community organizations that make up the Dignity in Schools campaign, which is our effort to speak with one voice on matters of school discipline, school push-out, and the way that we can create a culture in our schools, the type of culture of calm that Michael was speaking about, to ensure that the types of environments our students learn in are the types that keep them engaged, there, safe, healthy, and ready for full participation and full treatment of dignity in their lives. So I want to try to focus my remarks on how all of these issues kind of come to a head in the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. But to get there, I want to take a step back. I'm a former New York City public school teacher, like my friend Mike Cox from Gregory Meeks' office, right? We've done this, right? We've been there. And one of the things that I especially like about this panel is that you get the sense from Judge Teskey's remarks, from Michael's remarks, from Hillary's remarks, that it takes this whole multi-stakeholder alliance to get done what we need to get done to create this type of culture in our schools, right? To create the safe, supportive learning environments where our students can learn and our teachers can teach. And it's this moment where we are now, right? There's an organizer in Mississippi named Helen Johnson who calls this our perfect storm. Because despite the astronomical discipline rates and arrest rates that we see in our schools that we're going to review, you also see some real changes. When we used to see media on these issues, we saw coverage of super predators. Now we hear about the abominations of the student, the 5-year-old in Delaware, who brings his camping knife to school for show and tell, and is sent to alternative school for 45 days with the secondary school students, right? We hear the public outrage when a middle school girl, a 12-year-old in Queens, New York, is arrested for doodling "I love my friends" in not permanent but erasable marker on her school desk during school, right? We hear cries of outrage coming across the board. In Los Angeles, it's the United Teachers there that have taken a strong stand behind a new discipline policy that pushes for really teaching teachers how to do classroom management effectively in a way that's going to enable better learning. And when we have judges from Alabama and Georgia leading the charge in their communities to change the way students are being disciplined and to help promote a culture of inclusion in our schools, we know we have the type of alliance that needs to be in place to make a difference. It's that sort of perfect storm, and it's this very perfect sort of moment, this sort of window where when we look at the rates that we're about to go over, if we don't do something about it now, with the types of support that we have, with this convergence of interest that we have, we lose our best chance to ensure that our students are on the right track to graduation. So when we look at the national rates for discipline, and I'm going to focus on the school end of the school-to-prison pipeline that Judge Teskey talked about, our discipline rates in this country are double what they were in 1974. Each year, over 3.3 million students are being suspended at least once during the school year. When we see our middle schools, particularly in our urban schools, some schools suspend over half of their African-American male students at least once each year. Right? Over 100,000 students are being expelled in our schools. When we look at the types of examples of how that's playing out and why that's going so quickly in our states, in Pennsylvania, the number of school-based arrests, for example, almost tripled between 1999 and 2006, up from 4,500 to over 12,000, right? In Chicago, this is before Michael was hired for the position and why Michael was hired for this position. You had the number of out-of-school suspensions quadrupled from 2001 to 2007. That's up from 24,000 to 93,000. In Florida, a state that has just amended its state zero tolerance policy, its zero tolerance law, you had 69% of the state's school-based arrests for misdemeanors, the type of thing that too often I feel and I worry Michael and I would have called home about when we were teachers. So we are in this evidence-based time that Judge Teskey was talking about, so we do know the research. We do have the evidence of what's happening in our schools and what this is doing to our students. The Centers for Disease Control, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Psychological Association, and others have found that increased use and reliance on out-of-school punishments and school-based arrests makes students more likely to drop out of school, be retained to grade, engage in delinquent behavior, become a parenting team, become involved in the juvenile and criminal justice systems. But the problems that these things create don't just end at the individual student level. The American Psychological Association, in its landmark work on zero-tolerance policies, found that when schools rely too hard and too heavy on these policies, that you see lower test scores for the school as a whole. You see greater dissatisfaction from teachers, ironically because they feel like they don't have the support of a strong administration. And perhaps worse, despite the reliance on these policies, you see no proven gains in school safety. So these are some of the impacts on the school, but just as Hillary was saying, you have an economic impact that we've only begun to wrestle with. It's the type of thing that Pat Nolan and Right on Crime and the Conservative Texas Public Policy Foundation have said is a big problem. And when we look at juvenile arrest rates and the budget drain that that's created, one of the places we have to look first is how that's coming from our schools. That's the economics, right? But that doesn't even count or factor in the lost academic hours, the lost hours of instruction that happen when students are no longer in the building, right? Just like Judge Teskey said, the reason the 20%, 21% graduation rate increase is because the students were there and the school was ready for them, right? And just as Judge Teskey said, this happens and happens hardest and happens worst to our historically disenfranchised youth. Students with disabilities, twice as likely to receive out-of-school punishments as their non-disabled peers. Students whose sexual orientation or perceived sexual orientation is out of the norm for the school, also more likely to receive harsher punishments. Students of color, especially African-American students, nearly 3 times as likely to be suspended, 3.5 times as likely to be expelled. Latino students, 1.5 times as likely to be suspended, twice as likely to be expelled. And the worst and most pernicious of this is that whereas there are objective offenses, the type of things that Michael and I could call clear as day, if a student came to school bringing a knife, that's a knife. That's something that we can see very clearly. You take that out of you, right? There are subjective offenses, things like disrespect, disorderly conduct, disrupting public school. And for these offenses, students of color are disciplined much more harshly, much more often, and receive much stronger punishment than their white peers. Right? So we've created a discipline system in zero tolerance, which was supposed to be fair and neutral, where it seems like discipline really is happening in the eye of the beholder. If this is what the common stance is in our schools, and if this is the common practice, then we are not going to close an achievement gap. We are not going to end the graduation rate crisis. And the work that's going on right now, the many hours of midnight oil that is being spent toward the reauthorization of the ESEA, is not going to change these fundamental problems. So Kamara and Alana asked me to come and talk about some of the places. Like I said, this is that perfect storm. This is that time when you do have teachers' unions campaigning for and standing behind practices that are going to change discipline in schools, where you do have juvenile court judges in the deep South who are making the difference by convening all of these stakeholders, all of these community members, to make a difference in these practices. I want to highlight 2 places in particular. You know, the judge stole my talking points for Clayton County. The first is Denver, right? And as I say this, right, it's just as important the practice or the model as it is the people who are making it happen. And in Denver, there's a parent and student organizing group. It's an intergenerational group of Padres Jóvenes Unidos, who, after seeing years of increased arrests in Denver schools, increased suspensions and expulsions, came together and power mapped the city. The students were organizing, were interviewing the school resource officers, the juvenile probation officers, the teachers, the administrators, and then superintendent, now Senator Michael Bennett, to understand what this problem was in those schools. As everybody came on board with a vision to change this, they implemented the principles of restorative justice to better create and strengthen the bonds, like is being done in Chicago between students and their teachers, and among the students themselves. As a result, the suspension rate in Denver is down 44%. And it was these same parents and students that partnered with the district to not only rewrite the discipline code, but also to get the types of grants and funding to make the change and bring in the professional development that the district needed to realize these solutions. Another is school-wide positive behavior supports, or PBS, right? Not like Kermit the Frog PBS, but shorthand like PBS. It's one of those evidence-based practices that is proven to not only reduce disciplinary referrals, but also increase a school's sense of safety, the teacher's sense of morale, student attendance, and student test scores, right? And a perfect example is that which happened in Alton, Illinois, when two middle schools merged to form the third largest school in that state. Apparently there were 20 expulsions in the first year because there was a lot of turf between students, as some of the teachers put it, and it sounds like there was also a lot of turf between teachers, as one of the administrators put it. When the school combined its positive behavior support efforts with restorative justice, and just with a real keen eye to reducing these disciplinary rates and disparities, they saw a drop in disciplinary referrals of 32%, a drop in suspension rates of 26%, and perhaps most importantly, a shrinking of the racial discipline gap that had existed in that school. So, to take it from the school level to the state level, as I said earlier, we've seen tremendous change in Florida, where after a decade of organizing by the NAACP, there was a complete rewrite of the state's zero tolerance law or policy, and it clearly delineates, just like Judge Teskey's school offense protocol does, the difference between what a teacher deals with, an administrator deals with as discipline, and what the school resource officer deals with as safety. As a result, we're seeing in the districts that are doing it well, significant drops in the school arrest rates in Florida. So here are some ways that we've seen it happen in Denver, in Illinois, in Florida, and I want to take a moment just to highlight some ways that we can make a very quick and easy difference if we look at this from a federal lens and at a federal level. Again, I'm here on behalf of the Dignity in Schools campaign, which is our effort as teachers, parents, students, community and civil rights organizations to speak with one voice on these issues of school discipline. And the 4 places that we feel we can make a difference are very simple. First, there's a lot of data being collected from safe and drug-free schools, from the Office for Civil Rights and the Department of Education and others on discipline. Problem is, there's never one page where parents see it, teachers see it, community members see it. If we had that data in a very clear and accessible place that gets at things in a manner disaggregated in the same way we do NCLD, we have a much clearer picture of what's happening in our schools when it comes to discipline. Second, simple, when we look at that data, we need to figure out ways not to punish schools with it, but to ensure that the schools that have the highest rates and the disciplinary disparities, much like the way that we do things under NCLD now, that those schools can receive the types of supports they need to reduce those numbers and to shrink those gaps. Third, as then Senator, now President Obama did in his Positive Behavior for Effective Schools Act, we need to simply look at ways that we can make explicit an effort to direct school improvement funds toward implementing the types of practices that improve school discipline and school climate. And fourth, we need to ensure that we have funds that are dedicated to bringing to scale and to replicating what Judge Teskey does, and what the folks in Denver did, and what the folks in Alton, Illinois did, to have those types of programs implemented, bringing in the multi-stakeholders who need to be in the room to reduce students' exposure to the juvenile justice system and keep them in school. So, look forward to everybody's questions.